Well, hello, hello. Welcome back again. And I know it's been a while. And it's been a while since I first saw you. And it's been a while that I've gone and messed things up. Just like I always do. Okay, I'm kind of messing around, but those are just a couple of lyrics. I did censor them a little bit because there's a certain word. But if you can guess what song that's from, uh, congratulations. I wouldn't guess it. But for some reason I did remember the song right now. At any rate, today I know it's been a while since I've recorded a video, but I wanted to talk about a series. And more than just the series, I wanted to talk about like the whole journey up to now. And what I mean about this is that with the release, well, with the ending of season 1 of The Rings of Power, which is from the Lord of the Rings universe, I did wanted to kind of revisit the story as we know it so far, as so far as the films, because there are a lot more stories and there's a lot more background information and world development when you read the books. However, the books, there's plenty. It would take too long to go over each and one of them. And so I just wanted to go into like a more of a Cliff Notes version, if you will, which would be the movies, and in this case, the series. So I'll be trying to do it in chronological order, starting with the Rings of Power. Then the following videos should be about the Hobbits, as in the trilogy, and then followed by the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, what would be the core Lord of the Rings trilogy. At any rate, let's get started. Now, with the Rings of Power, we are looking at kind of like the story before the story. That means that before there was a Ring of Power, before it was Sauron's Ring, there was more story. A story that we didn't get to hear that much about because, well, The Lord of the Rings wasn't about that. So this time around, we actually get to follow the journey, it got to that point. Now, we do follow a couple of characters, and the characters that we follow are Galadriel. Well, I'm gonna group them up because we do follow Galadriel. We follow, I believe his name is, well, he's gonna be Elrond, but they do say another name. And we also follow Halbrand. Galadriel and Elrond, obviously they're elves, high elves, if we have to be specific. And Halbrand is apparently a human. Then we have the next group, which is this strange visitor that fell from the stars, or fell from the sky. And he literally did fall from the sky. And he does follow this group of hobbits. And more specifically, he follows Nori Brandefoot. But then we have another group, which is the Arondir, who is another elf. And along with, let's see, what's her name? It's... Yeah, I'm really bad with names. But basically, it's Arondir, who is one of the knights that's watching the area, the region where he's in. And he is also accompanied by a woman, a human, from this village, along with her brother. Or, I mean, not her brother, her son. And I'll explain a little bit more each story as we go along with this video. But when when the series opens up, when the season begins, we follow Galadriel. And Galadriel, she's climbing up this mountain. She finds this area. It's a lot of turmoil, and it's not an easy expedition, you could call it. She's followed with her fellow elves who are part of her army or part of her military group. But it's very obvious that they've been traveling for quite a long time. They've traveled far, far away. They've been through a lot of dangers, and not just that, but they're chasing what seems to be an impossible or like a rumor. They're not really sure if it exists. And what Galadriel is searching for is she's looking for Sauron. And she's looking for Sauron in particular because she knows that Sauron hasn't just gone away. They did defeat Morgoth. I mean, Morgoth? That's the name. Again, I'm really terrible with names, but before Sauron went into power, Sauron himself was like the commander below this high elf, and not just any higher elf. And I guess I have to explain this because it's not explained here in the series. But if you read the Silmarillion, it does explain it fully what's going on up to this point. And so in the Silmarillion, very much like the Christian Bible, where it starts with, there's the book of Genesis, and in the beginning there was this, and this. So in the beginning there was this, the highest of the high elves that you can be. And this high elf created other high elves that were of lesser power. Think of them as the angels in the Bible. And basically these high elves, or these higher elves, had powers, and they could also do a lot of things that the supreme elf, I'm just going to call him supreme elf because I can't remember what's the exact name they give that elf, but they also have the power to do their own, to do their own will. Until there was one who said, you know what, I can also create life, I can do my own. And so that elf actually went a little rogue. That elf is the one that becomes the leader, or the evil leader that will command all these evil creatures and will steer a lot of problems, really. Sauron becomes his general, his commander. I mean, he's kind of like the second in command. That's why once they get to a point in the war where Morgoth, I think that's his name, is defeated, now Sauron is the second in command, and he is the one who's, as long as he's alive, he's still going to continue doing what he needs to do. He's still going to promote, all these evil creatures and all these evil doings. Now, Galadriel, the reason why she's following Sauron is that Sauron has been active using orcs and goblins to do some really evil stuff. And by that I mean destroying crops, attacking villages, murdering people. And in Galadriel's brother, he actually is part of one of the groups that went after Sauron. But he comes back dead. He was killed by Sauron. And so that's where Galadriel has that motivation to continue the fight that her brother began. And that begins like her mission for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. I believe they say thousands, but I could also be mistaken. Now, as they get to the place where it is possible hideout for Sauron and the orcs and goblins, they don't find anything. Galadriel and her men, they don't find anything. And at that point, they've been on the expedition for so long that they kind of rebel against Galadriel and say, we've been following you, we've been loyal to you, but this has been enough. There's no signs of Sauron. We have no proof that he's still alive. We want to go back. And they do. Taking her man's wishes into consideration, she does go back, and the king of the elves, he does accept that they did a good job, and they can return to the Valar, or the Valinor, which is basically over the sea. It's the kind of like the heavens, if you will, if you want to stick with the Bible metaphor. And so that's where they are sent. However, Galadriel is not very convinced that it's over, and she remembers the words of her brother. when she was little, saying that, sometimes you have to touch what is evil. You have to get there to that point before you can actually make up your mind and be sure that what you want or what you want to do, that is the right thing to do. Sometimes you do have to hit that point, that low point, to be truly convinced that what you're going to do, that your actions are what need to be done, even when everybody says that it's not. And so she jumps out of the ship. Once she was really at the doors of the Valinor, she jumps back to the sea. And this is where you have to suspend your belief, because she starts swimming back, which is quite a distance, back to Middle Earth. And, you do have to think, well, she's an elf, so she has, you know, more endurance, more strength. So, yeah, I mean, you suspend your belief that she really did swim for a very long time and for a very far distance. Now, she is found by these survivors that from a wreck that apparently their ship was destroyed. And as part of that situation, the creature that had destroyed the ship comes back and kind of finishes the job. So it's only her and one other survivor. This survivor, his name is Halbrand. She does convince Halbrand to return to Middle Earth because she needs to go back to. It's back to like, I believe it's not the west, like the east or the south. She has to go back to the area where Halbrand is from, because as they were talking, he does explain that his village was attacked by orcs and goblins, which could only mean that that's where Sauron is. So that's why she wants to go back. Now, we're gonna we're gonna pause that and go to, um, let's say this older gentleman, the one that fell down from the stars, or from the sky, I should say. Now, at this point, the hobbits, they are not really called hobbits, at least not yet, and they don't live in the Shire, and they're not the hobbits that we know from, from the Hobbits and from the Lord of the Rings. They're still not there yet. How we get to know them is as a group of nomads. They travel to where berries and certain fruits grow. They travel to where it's safe. They have their own path, and even they have a song that says, don't stray from the path, don't get left behind, just follow along, and you will be safe. And that's what they do. They follow a certain path. They have a, can't remember how they call them, but it's like a sort of pathfinder who's going to lead them the way. And that's how they migrate, and that's their nomadic lifestyle. Of course, they don't fight, they don't use magic. The only ability they have, and it's an ability which it's not really explained in any point of the cinematic universe for the Lord of the Rings. Not in the Lord of the Rings, not in the Hobbit. You see, the hobbits, they are very in tune with nature. So much that their footsteps are very quiet. So they're so silent that even elves can't hear them if they wanted to. And that is because, again, they're so in tune with nature that that's kind of like, in a way, how nature protects them, because that's how weak as a species they are. Again, they don't fight, they don't use magic, but in a way, they are protected. And that's how they are so silent that nobody actually pays attention. And if you need proof of this, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but if you go to the Lord of the Rings, when they are having the council of the ring, when they're in Rivendell, in the Fellowship of the Ring, in Rivendell, with Elrond, they talk about what to do with the ring of power, from that belongs to Sauron. They didn't hear when Sam was hiding, listening to what they were saying. They also didn't hear Mary or Pippin, and we all know that Pippin is not exactly the most subtle of anyone, really. So that should give you an idea of their ability to remain hidden. Well, as part of the journey, something happens in which there is a fire in the sky, and this light happens nearby where the hobbits are staying at that time. That's where Nori, being a very curious hobbit, something that's rare in hobbits, goes out to see what is going on, what could it be, and finds a grown man. And not just a grown man, but she says a giant. Now, keep in mind that hobbits are already short as it is, more like 4 feet, 4'5". I think the tallest one is like 4'11", something like that. So you can tell that, for them, he is a giant. But the stranger, he doesn't talk. It's like he forgot to talk. And when he does say something, it's like he's talking in another tongue, in another language, a language that hasn't been heard in Middle Earth. But Nori befriends the stranger, and the stranger does follow along the hobbits, and he helps them out. In particular, Nori's dad, he happens to strain his ankle, and so the stranger helps by lifting the barrel, or well, not the barrel, but it's it's also not like a carriage, but where they are carrying their belongings and moving along. That's what he helps them carry, so that they can move everything along and follow and not fall behind. Because again, you fall behind, you're in danger. You're away from the group, you are probably not going to catch up. Now, at any rate, we're going to go over to the next group. And again, this next group is Arondir. Arondir, he is an elf. He's part like of the military power. And he is stationed over at nearby a village. And this village does have a history. And there's a reason why they're there. Basically, the village in the past had helped Morgoth. They helped the bad guy, right? When the bad guy was in power. And ever since, well, obviously they have no one to fight for anymore, so they're not a threat. But they do have elves stationed there just to keep an eye and make sure that they don't start helping out a new evil power instead. Now, jumping back to, well, let me talk a little bit more about Arondir. Arondir, he is an elf, like I said. And this village is a little bit special because having spent so many decades next to that village, even though the people are kind of, they're very much cautious of him, he actually falls in love with this woman. Now, this woman, we don't get information about what happens to her husband or anything, but apparently she's a single mom. The kid, he's kind of a brat. I mean, he really is a brat. And where this is important is that the kid actually finds something that he shouldn't have found. And when we see it, it's basically a broken sword. But the funny thing, or not, well, it's not really funny, but the mysterious thing about the sword is that by taking the blood of the user, it kind of forms this temporary blade, which is dangerous, and it's also very ominous because you can tell that it is not just any regular weapon. So yeah, he shouldn't be messing around with it, but of course, being the brat that he is, Yeah, he doesn't really come up front saying, "Oh, hey, look what I found." He actually hides it. Now, going back to Galadriel. Galadriel, she manages to convince um, Hellbrand that they're going to go back to Middle Earth and they're going to go back to the south, where he is from, and where he says that his people was attacked by orcs and goblins. Now, here's the thing: they are found by the Numenor. The Numenor, just for a little bit of context, if we talk about again as a metaphor to the Bible, or as an allegory, or however you want to call it, when the Supreme Elf created men, the first race of men, they had a certain physique, they had a certain endurance, they lived a relatively long time, not as much as elves, but they did live quite a bit, and they were known for being noble and by being courageous. They were known as the Numenor. Now, I don't know if you might remember, but you might have heard Numenor because if you've seen The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn, Aragorn is the last of the Numenor. There's no more. He is the last of his people, and they are considered to be like the first people. Then you have like other people that kind of spread out, but really he is part of like the oldest or ancient of people. And if you wanted kind of further proof, think of in the movies, you know how young he looks. Well, in the books, he does look like that more or less. But when he meets, let's see, what was her name? She is the niece of the king of Rohan. She is relatively young, and when she kind of has this crush on Aragorn, Aragorn at that point he's about 60 something. Even though he doesn't look old, and in the books he's not described as being as looking old, but you know, she is probably in her 20s. He is in his 60s. So that should give you an idea of, the difference between the two races or the two people. Anyway, so continuing with the story. And I know this is probably taking too long, so I'll kind of hurry up. They are found by the Numenor, who are just in the sea, and they're patrolling. They are happen to be found by not just any of the Numenor. They are actually found by, let's see. And yes, I kind of have to look it up because I'm very bad with names. But he happens to be, let's see, Elendil, I think. And Elendil, here's the thing. You might not recognize a lot of these names, but what's impressive is that you have Elendil, but when you're presented with the fact that he has a son called Isildur, that should give you a clue on who he is. And in case you don't remember, in The Lord of the Rings, Isildur is the one king who was fighting against Sauron. He cuts the finger that has the ring. He has the chance to destroy the ring, but the ring just takes over his mind. And he doesn't want to destroy it, and he doesn't. And that's what led to the events that happen in The Lord of the Rings. I cannot have it on myself, but basically Elendil, Captain Elendil, he is a captain in the seas. And so when they get back, he goes to the queen and says, hey, look, this is who I found. What's important about this meeting is that they haven't had a high elf. Well, they haven't had any elves visit Numenor, much less a high elf like Galadriel. And there's a bit of apprehension because they were given that land by the elves, and their fear is that Galadriel is there to take that land away, to take things away from them, which is not the case. And they do have like a back and forth, and they have a heart to heart. Eventually, she does convince the queen to let her leave to Middle Earth in order to continue doing her, well, was basically her mission. And Halbrand, he also goes along. He doesn't want to. He is very reluctant, but he is convinced that he has to return, um, revealing that he is really the heir to the people of the South. Well, they go and they go to the South. And not just that, but they also have the Numenor along with them. When they get there, that's when the fun begins. And by fun, it's like one of those action sequences that follow, where they find a village that's being attacked by orcs and goblins, and they arrive just in time to save them. The village they get to is where Erondil, no, not Erondil, what's the name? No, Erondir, the elf that falls in love with the human in the village. That's where they are, because apparently now they're being invaded by orcs and goblins, who now know that the kid, the brat I was talking about, that he has the sword, and obviously they are going for it. Nobody understands why this is important, but it is. Now you might be thinking, well, who is behind the goblins and orcs? Oh, it has to be Sauron, right? Not exactly. So, who is really behind all this? His name is what's his name? They call him Adar. Adar. And the orcs actually call him father, which is kind of strange, but at any rate, this is where the stories kind of begin to merge between um, Galadriel, Halbrand, and Erondir. Because as Erondir, he was trying to save the village. What had happened during this whole kind of like what was happening over in Numenor is that the goblins found out that the kid had found the weapon. Not just that, but they had made their way to the village by digging underground tunnels. What that caused is that at night they had an invasion. So they had to escape to this far off tower where they can use as a fortress, which didn't actually work because the forces were going to be too much. And some of the people, well, a lot of the people in the village decided to join forces with Adar because, well, hey, can't defeat the enemy, might as well join them. And that's what they were doing. Now, they were aware of what they were looking for, which is the sword. They didn't understand why yet. And so they did kind of like a fake and switch. So the people of the village that remained in the tower, they kind of sneaked away, pretended like there were still people in the tower. When Adar and his goblins and orcs got there, they thought they were going to be killing somebody, but they didn't. That's when they were closed off in the tower. The tower was broken down into pieces with an explosion, and they went back to the village where they were going to fortify their defenses in order to meet again with the orcs and goblins. That didn't work too well because it was an overwhelming force, especially because the forces they had fought at the beginning were actually the people from the village that had joined the other side. And so the orcs and goblins were still intact. Their forces were still intact. That's where they were in trouble. And it's kind of similar to what happened with in the Two Towers, where they were being overwhelmed and they were breaking in the fortress, and all of a sudden you see the horsemen and the military might of Rohan. Well, in this case, it wasn't Rohan, but it was from the Numenor. And they kind of saved the day. They captured Adar. But there is something kind of wrong going on because Adar, as they interrogate him, they find out that he was actually an elf. An elf that was taken away, was distorted, and now is not an elf, but he is still an elf, if that makes sense. They kind of twisted him in a way that now he's just a corrupted elf, if you can call him that. Now, before I continue, let me just go back to what is going on with Elrond, because, like I said, this follows several people, several stories. And Elrond, he is a friend of Galadriel. Before Galadriel went on the ship, supposedly to go to the Valinor, he talked to Galadriel, and that's where she told him that there's still things that she needs to do. Sauron is still out there. There is still things going on. It's not just peace. Elrond doesn't have a lot of time to kind of reflect on this. When the king of the elves, he calls him in and he is off on a mission. The mission is to help this great blade. Well, he's a blacksmith, but again, I'm not good with names, so the titles escape me. But he's the greatest blacksmith among the elves and among all the other races. And so Elrond, he is going to help him. Now, what exactly do they need help with? That's where the mission is. They have to build this forge, this big forge, in order to create and forge these weapons that they can use, because they know that they're going to need weapons. Well, as it turns out, Elrond has an idea, because there is a very short deadline. But Elrond comes up with the idea of, well, why is it just us elves? Why not ask for help? And they do. He actually goes to the Misty Mountains, which happens to be nearby. And in the Misty Mountains, he actually meets up with an old friend. Well, kind of. And that's where things get interesting. So you see, in the Misty Mountains, you have Prince Durin. And Prince Durin, he is kind of mad with Elrond, because apparently Elrond stopped seeing him for a couple of decades. And that made him mad because, they were friends since they were little. And now he disappeared, and now all of a sudden he appears again. So he kind of has that resentment. And, despite Elrond explaining that, for elves, time is a little bit different because they live such a long time, that a couple of decades seems like a short time. But for the dwarves, it isn't. They do finally make their peace. And that's when he tries to help him out, Prince Durin. But the problem is that what they're asking is for, well, they can't exactly offer help. And they're not sure about sharing resources with him. But as they're kind of discussing the matter, he does find out a secret. A secret that Prince Durin was hiding, which is basically the existence of a pure substance called Mithril. If you remember, mithril is the precious metal that is lighter than all the other metals, most durable, and it's extremely powerful when it's made into a weapon or into like a like a Shane armor. Anyway, I'm not good with those names, but anyway, uh, so you have Mithra, which hadn't been known about up to this point. There is kind of like a side point about the Mithra, and that is that when the higher elves had planted a tree on top of this mountain, which is the Misty Mountains, the mountains had kind of like these servants of the Dark Lord, and I'm talking about Voldemort, but you had Balrogs. And it is said that in one battle, it was the power of the High Elves against the power of the Balrogs. And that caused the tree to kind of wither and die. But that tree was a special tree because it had the essence of the stars, of the Similarian, of the Cimmerals, I should say. And that essence dripped in roots, as in roots, into the mountain. And that is what formed this type of metal, mithril. They didn't realize this at that point, but Prince Durin was kind of concerned that Elrond was just back because of the silver, or not silver, but because of mithril, and so that's why he was kind of hiding it from him. And but Elrond was reassuring him that he doesn't really care about that. It's not until Elrond talks to the king of the elves and says that, well, no, dwarves are not going to cooperate, which is when the king reveals that there is this substance, that the way to kind of save the elves in Middle Earth, because their power is waning, they're no longer as powerful as before. And so, if they remain, the elves, if they remain in Middle Earth, they will eventually lose their essence, lose their power, and they will die when elves shouldn't die. Not of natural causes. They should live for a very long time, forever, actually. However, the only way to save them is by kind of reabsorbing that essence from that tree and then, pass it along the elves. And that's the thing. I mean, Elrond's been in a dark place. Well, not a dark place, a difficult place between saving his people and betraying his friend. He doesn't want to do either. So he does talk with Prince Durin. And Prince Durin, he really is also in a tough situation because his dad wouldn't approve. He knows that. But he wants to help out his friend. And when he talks to his father, the king says, no way, you're not going to help him with that. You're not going to give him mithril. And actually, the where it has been dug up, do not have access to it anymore. And so, well, now he can't help his friend. However, there is this very touching scene with his wife, who kind of tells him, you know what, this may be tough, but you can find another way. And they agree that the way that he can help his friend, help Elrond, is by looking for another vein, looking for that other access, making a new access to that mithril. He wouldn't be going against the wishes of his father, but he would still be able to help his friend. Now, Galadriel, she, going back to where we were with Lady Galadriel and Adar, Erondir, he's already with the woman he loves and the child. Well, he's not really a child, he's more like a teenager, but still. I mean, they're already on their way, right? In a way. However, while they were still with, you know, while Adar is still captive, something happens. That something is the goblins manage to get their hands on the sword, the dark sword, and they go back to the tower. Now, this is where kind of like a piece of the mystery gets solved because that sword is actually a key that actually activates this mountain, this volcano that had been dormant. And that causes a huge explosion and this rain of ash that covers the whole area, meaning that there's they're basically covering ashes, but also there's some damages. The queen in particular, the queen of Numenor, she is left blind. Not just that, but Adar, he escapes. And now he's back with his henchmen, with the goblins and the orcs, and also like the other men who agree to help them out. We are left to believe that that is what will later become as the gates of Mordor, or that area of Mordor where that might be Mount Doom and all the other things that happen later on. Now we're finished with that chapter, but what happens with Galadriel? Galadriel and Halbrand, they make it back to the High King, the High Elf King. And what they agree on is that they're going to help with the the elf who is a blacksmith to continue his work. And so they are working on making, instead of focusing on like a huge mass production of silver or of metals, they agree on making three objects. However, in order to use these objects, they need to infuse it with a powerful metal. Now, mm, while they don't have access to Mithril as of yet, a gift that Prince Durin gave to Elrond happens to be a fragment of Mithril. It's more like a crystal shaped metal, but it doesn't combine with any other metal that well. That is, unless it's pure. That's where Galadriel, she has to part with her knife, which happens to be a gift. Well, it happened to belong to her brother, but the knife was made in the Valinor, and it's made of pure gold and pure silver, and it works. It does combine. However, Galadriel isn't very convinced about Halbrand at this point. She had been convinced that they were allies and they've been working together, but she does grow suspicious of him. And so at that time, an elf who she asked for help comes back with this revealing information. That information being that it has the family tree and it has the lineage of the peoples of the south. And what she finds is that Halbrand isn't really Halbrand. He isn't really the heir to the throne of the south. So what is going on? At that point, Halbrand reveals himself. And I'll explain the reveal a little bit in a minute, but he basically reveals himself that no, he's not Halbrand, he's someone else. That he had told her that he wasn't good, but she didn't believe him. And that's where he disappears. Now, before I continue, let me go back to the stranger who fell from the sky. As the stranger is trying to, well, he's learning new words. Or I should say, he's learning the language in Middle Earth, the common language. Nori is teaching him. But there are moments where he uses incredibly strong magic, which doesn't end too well. At one point, they were being attacked by wolves, And these wolves could have massacred the hobbits if it weren't because he stepped in and he kind of threw the wolves around. So he protected them. But there was another time which he was growing fruit from a dead tree or a tree that was burned, but one of the dead branches actually broke and almost hit Nori, and it caused a huge commotion because Nori began to be afraid of him. It wasn't until Nori starts seeing that it's not that just that he's powerful, and it's not just that he lost his memory, but there is more to him that he really does need help. However, that doesn't stop the fact that they were all afraid of him, so they sent him away. And that's when these people, these weird people, I mean, they have these robes and they're looking for the stranger. Nori gives them one direction that's completely wrong, just to kind of keep them away from him. But it doesn't work. They do find the stranger, and what's more is that they seem to be convinced that the stranger is Sauron, and that they are his servants, and they try to awaken his memory. It doesn't work well, and we have another reveal. And the reveal is, well, obviously he's not Sauron. So in an M. Night Shyamalan, kind of, I'll explain that in a bit, he reveals himself to be the Grey Wanderer, Mithrandir, Gandalf. These are his names, or that's how he would be known later on. But he is Gandalf. All of a sudden, he can now speak the common language. All of a sudden, he gets back his memories. Kind of. Not all of them, but enough to be functional. And he now has to leave on his own journey. Nori decides to go along with him, very much like Bilbo. She has this curiosity, and she wants to know the bigger world around her, not just the little one that where they live and let live. So her family give her their blessings, and she's now traveling with Gandalf. That's the end of that chapter. But going back to Galadriel, Galadriel reveals that Halbrand is not actually Halbrand. He is actually Sauron. And now they're in for quite the good time of their lives. Oh, yeah. But at that point, it's not as bad because they finish forging 3 rings. And that's how the season ends. Obviously, a lot more things happen, but this is like a very condensed version of 8 hours of a series. Well, kind of, because it is about an hour each episode, and there's 8 episodes. Now, a couple of things. It is interesting, and we did need kind of that story before the story, more world building. However, it seemed very odd what they were trying to do. Because once you see the stranger that falls from the sky, I mean, your first impression is, oh, hobbits? Gandalf. Because Gandalf is the only wizard that I'm aware of who actually pays any attention to hobbits. So it would make sense that he met the hobbits at one point. He fell in love. Well, he befriended the species and has like a soft spot for them ever since. Because he does visit the Shire very frequent, very often. And they even know him. Even after generations of not being seen, the newer generations still have heard about him. So it's not that odd that it would be Gandalf. But they kind of play it off that he could be somebody else, and then for that one episode or two, they play it like, oh, he is actually Sauron, and that's kind of like, okay, I don't believe that, but okay, let's run along with it. But by the end of the episode, they reveal that, oh, okay, no, he's not Sauron, he's somebody else. So it's really that kind of trickery is not. First of all, it's not necessary, and two, those three characters, like I said, the three characters with their robes, they weren't really necessary in the story. So I don't see how they fit in. Not really. Especially because once we have the reveal at the final episode on who is actually Sauron, he has his, I mean, there's nothing wrong with him. He has his memories, he has his strength. So it's, why are they even out there to begin with? I have no idea. Why was Sauron headed toward the Valinor? No idea, because it was just him. Did he know that Galadriel was going to be in the water? Who knows? It's kind of weird. And like again, you do have to concede that certain things happen because they happen. You can't really overthink it. So it's still kind of like, what do you do? Now, as far as the as far as like the ending, you have the three rings. If you keep in mind that there is a reason why the series is called The Rings of Power. And if you remember, there were three rings that were made for the elves. 9 were made for men, for the kings of men. And I think like 5 or so were made for the dwarves. Sauron, in secret, makes his own ring. And that's kind of like the one ring to rule them all. Right now, we now have the 3 rings of power. We know that one goes to Elrond, one goes to Lady Galadriel. The other one, I can't remember who it goes to. And in all this time, it's kind of weird because Galadriel, we know that she is a powerful elf. Well, high elf, I should say. She is very powerful. And she, in a way, has mind reading, mind invading. Like, she has abilities with mind. But she didn't use any powers in the series. We can kind of, in like, intuition would say probably she doesn't have the powers, or she doesn't know that she has them. But still, it's going to be interesting to see, like, at what point do we see her as Lady Galadriel that we know, and at what point do we see Elrond and his powers? Because again, Elrond does have powers, but we only see them as regular elves, like no supernatural abilities whatsoever. So that's going to be an interesting thing to consider. Alright, I'm going to leave it there for now. That was the first season of Rings of Power. I know that the second season is in the works and will be released. I'm not sure when. But this series does leave with a few questions that I'm going to wait for them to be answered in the next season. Just because I did enjoy the series. There was just some, not inconsistencies, but there are some things that, like, for me, I need to make sure that they tie in. And I know about them just because I've read Silmarillion and I've seen The Lord of the Rings, I've seen The Hobbit. The same can be said for many of the people who are watching the series. But there might be people who have not seen all the movies or have read the books. So the things that I wonder is, well, how are they going to tie in certain details that maybe for the average viewer who doesn't have an extensive knowledge background knowledge of Middle Earth, if they will catch on to it, and how are they gonna kind of complement the story, because there is no actual story as of itself. Like, we do have bits and pieces of history, of the history of Middle Earth, but there isn't like an actual, just like we follow Bilbo Baggins or Frodo in their journey to a mission. There isn't like a Lady Galadriel story or an Elrond story. It will also be interesting to see the story of Isildur, because again, Isildur is Aragorn's grandfather. So, at what point does he become king, and king of what? Because he's not the king of the Numenor in the series. He becomes a king. So, at what point does he branch out from being just a regular soldier and becomes this figurehead? Now, I didn't mention it, but I will going to mention it right now. There is a scene where, when the volcano exploded and everything is covered in ashes and the village burns down and everything falls down, Isildur is trapped inside a building and they leave him for dead. Now, I can see that's for like dramatic purposes, but we already know from The Lord of the Rings that Isildur is going to survive that, because he has to survive that. If not, you won't have all the other events that happen. So I don't see what's the purpose of making that dramatic moment last so long, just to say in the next season, oh, now he's alive. We already know he's alive. So why don't we see him, rejoin the group, or why don't we see him being found? I mean, it's okay if they go, oh, he might be dead, and then, oh, you know what? He is alive. Because we already know he's alive. If we didn't know this information, then I would understand. But, like, again, there's a few things that are done that, because we already know the story or what's going to happen in the future, and we just need to fill in certain gaps, they can't play around with suspense as much, because we already know the events that need to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see how they tie everything. And I do mean it. It is interesting. It is a good series. It is fascinating, all these special effects that they put in. And I really like that it's well done. It's not just, just like in the original movies, it's not that, oh, I have magic, I'm going to be spamming magic all the time. Or, you know what? I have horses, we're going to run everybody down all the time. Now, there is a certain level of, character development, plot development, and that's great. So I have high hopes for the rest of the series. Alright, I've been going on about it a very long time. I'm going to debate whether if I cut this down into 2 videos or just leave it as an hour video. At any rate, drop a comment. Let me know, what did you think? Have you seen it? Do you want to see it? Have you read or seen the movies regarding The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, or, of Middle Earth? And remember, always remember, take care, stay healthy, be kind to those around you, because you never know what they're going through. See you later. Until next time.